Hello everyone. My name is Brooks Slaybaugh, and I'm from Hosei University, and I'm also working at a few other universities in the Tokyo area, at Tokyo University of Science, at Tokyo University of Agriculture and Technology, and also at Toyo University. My topic today is called Bridging the Gap in Online Learning, and the background about this presentation is that I've noticed some students are having a hard time dealing with online learning and are not doing so well academically. So this is me trying to address this topic to try to find some solutions about how, as teachers, we can help our students get better at online learning. Today I will talk about bridging the gap in online learning. I have found that there's a gap between students who do well in online learning and can learn independently, and those who struggle with online learning for various reasons. First of all, I will mention different kinds of learning management systems, or LMS, which is important in communicating with students since isolation is a real issue. Some of my students are in China or Korea and cannot get a visa, or other students could be learning at home due to health issues. Then I will mention the importance of feedback in online writing as a way for students to be engaged and to improve at process writing. After that, I will speak about the problems there are with online deadlines as well as with communicating with students. Next, I will talk about issues with digital literacy as some students are not prepared for online learning. Following that, I will give examples of what teachers can do for their students. Finally, I will say what teachers can do for themselves. I give an example about using social media because I find a lot of teachers, frankly, with online learning, we're quite isolated, and sometimes there are things that we cannot understand about the new kind of job that we have. And so I find that social media for teachers, asking each other about any issues or problems in Japan from people that live anywhere, it's really great. Okay, first I'm going to just talk about, I mean, it's probably obvious to most people, but the importance of the learning management system. What I've learned is that I'm a part-time teacher, so I'm working at four, sometimes up to five universities, and every school has their own kind of LMS, and I've been very surprised because every LMS is different and has its strengths and it has its weaknesses. So I can talk about that. And okay, we'll start first probably with Google Classroom. I think the best thing about Google Classroom is that you can pretty much use it anywhere, and anybody can use it. You just have to sign up and you use a Gmail address, and you can get your students to use a Gmail address, and then they can start using it. Otherwise, I believe that universities can create their own account as well. So then, but then the students must use their official university email address. Okay, so for Google Classroom, it can be used as a learning platform in teaching right. Sorry, in the benefits of Google Classroom as learning platform in teaching writing, which is a paper from Indonesia, and these writers in Indonesia really think Google Classroom is a great way to teach writing, especially perhaps process writing, and to promote active learning. And teachers can make assignments quickly. Feedback in writing and communication is quick, and no paper is needed. And teachers can see their student assignments in a single space. You can, as I said before, with Google Classroom, you can access it anywhere at any time. So it kind of changes the idea of what learning is, because usually when you think about teaching in the classroom, you show up like once a week at a certain time. Now, some students, maybe they prefer to learn at night or in the evening or other times of the day, and they can do that, you know. And teachers can respond uh, if they have time, of course. You know, that's the question. And so like what I told you before is that I have some students in China or Korea. They can't get a visa because of the coronavirus pandemic. And so I do think that Google Classroom can be quite useful for them and for me to check their writing and then respond to what they say. And I'm finding that it does help actually. Now my experience with Moodle is much less than Google Classroom. We're using it at Tokyo University of Science. It's some people don't like it because they think it's just too simple. But it's used at different universities in different countries. In Japan, you can use it in English as well as in Japanese, so that's help, especially for students if they need to get information or they don't know how to do something. They can click in Japanese and maybe get some help about how to do certain things on the website. So again, some people criticize it for being too simple, but in terms of doing assignments, like taking a quiz or something, or listening to a podcast, or taking a test, it can be automatically graded. So I think that's what's really useful for very busy teachers. The layout is really simple. At the top, you can have the forum where the teacher has the announcements, which you can edit and change. And then they just scroll down for like maybe weekly assignments, for example. It seems pretty effective for the students, I do find. Um, Again, so it's usually with Moodle, it's probably the layout because it's quite simple. Maybe that makes it easier for students. Other examples are Manaba, which is used in Japan. And in some ways, it's very simple. You know, you have an assignment, and then you can tell like it's due on this date, and it's available to be used from this date. And you can give them extra time to do their assignments. Perhaps the best thing with Manaba is that they can you can take their attendance. And so what you do is you have to create a number, a 9-digit number for each class, and then students have to input it. And then you can make notes, like if the student leaves class early, which does happen, for example. You know, they might think, oh, well, okay, I can just sign in and then I'm present, but if you leave early, I make a note that you left early, and that can affect your participation. And then there are other LMSs designed by universities as well. So LMS is really important just for helping with communication and giving important information for students. And it can be used at any time of the day, 24 hours a day. It's basically a reference page, you know, for students. Okay, so this part is about feedback for writing projects. I've been reading about how important feedback is with online teaching, especially with online writing. And a good article which I read about feedback is it's called "Missing Electronic Feedback in Egyptian EFL Essay Writing Classes." And although it was published in 2009, their findings seem quite relevant to our current teaching situation. So I think that back then, 12 years ago, there was no Google Classroom, and that these Egyptian teachers would welcome Google Classroom for process writing is a good way to communicate and give feedback for students. So Google Classroom is absolutely really helpful with process writing. And so again, although what they said is a little dated, I mean 12 years ago, their questions are right on the mark. They're really relevant. So these teachers are at Helwan University in Cairo. And so they really spoke about the importance of feedback. And they said that, I quote, learning is most likely to happen if feedback is frequent. And another quote is if students act on it to improve their future work, for example, for process writing, that it's beneficial. And so they want students to focus much more on the process writing to improve and to learn about the mistakes that they make and to continue to write and rewrite to get better. And then they also mention about the difference with different kinds of feedback, summative feedback, which has a focus on writing as a product, whereas formative feedback is on writing as a process. So that's what we really want to focus on here, is formative feedback for our students. Electronic feedback can give students it gives them a more active role instead of a passive reliance on teacher feedback to fix their writing, which we find with a traditional class. So something about online feedback, we can give them feedback in a more timely manner and perhaps even more frequently than we usually do in class, where we just check what they write maybe on a weekly basis. And also, electronic feedback is better at encouraging changes of the sentence and paragraph levels in their study. And also in their study from their university in Cairo, the results show that 97% of the sample show that email exchange was frequent, more contact with teachers. 65% found that electronic feedback was helpful in reshaping student ideas. And electronic feedback could reduce the role of the teacher and increase the amount of student participation. An example can be peer feedback, where students are helping each other. And peer feedback was found to be more effective if the students who were paired with were at different levels, not the same level. That's the key point. And students were found to write more because of the feedback. It kind of would encourage them. So one thing I found in Japan is that there seems to be more communication with my students when we do the online writing practice, such as on Google Classroom. And why is that? Perhaps students just like it. I think in the classroom, some students are a bit hesitant to speak up. And electronic feedback or using Google Classroom seems to encourage much more communication about writing. So that's definitely positive. But on the other hand, teachers get more busy. They have a lot more work to do. So that's the question, right? But I think students are getting better at writing. So I do think Google Classroom is helpful. Okay, the next thing I'm talking about is how flexible should we be as teachers, because deadlines are important. But some students miss deadlines. So this is a, a question. So I've been reading about teachers, on online social networking sites who have problems with students with deadlines, about students submitting work too late or missing deadlines. And my thinking is that we should have reasonable deadlines considering the situation of students, but should not let students turn things in late because since they procrastinated. Being too strict can be a problem as well, since some universities have policies where a limited amount of students can fail, actually. So it could be 20% or 30%. So in that case, maybe as teachers, we cannot count all submitted assignments, unsubmitted assignments as zero. And maybe we need to grade on a curve. Sometimes I have the opposite problem where students do too well, and I must grade on a curve too, because I had one example where too many students were getting the top grade because they were doing their homework and they were doing well, but we can't have too many students get the top grade as well because then the teacher gets in trouble and is thought to be too loose a grader. And so universities might limit the top grades as well as the bottom grades. In that case, the deadlines need to really be enforced. So it kind of depends on the academic performance of the class. It really does. Also, another issue is about communication. And of course, this is very important, helping some students, right, that are doing poorly. Communication with students must be maintained, but how much? We're often told to provide an email address. We can choose which email address we will provide for our students. Some teachers might object to a personal email address, but they should communicate somehow with their students. So students can use the LMS to post important messages, but teachers could respond to individual students. Usually by email is better. But one problem is that teachers can receive emails at any time of the day or night, any day of the week. And some teachers would say they could limit the amount of times they read and respond to emails. Teachers could refuse to respond on the weekends or in the evenings. Teachers should also teach politeness as well, since some emails are just too informal, or students do not say what class they're in, and teachers are left to figure it out. So we do have to communicate with our students to identify any problems or when they need help, but I think we have to draw, at some point we have to say, maybe I'll help you, but not, maybe wait till Monday morning or something. Just tell your students that, because some teachers are just extremely busy now and kind of really overworked. So that's another issue I find. Okay, I think this is maybe the real problem a lot of students are having with digital literacy. This is a preliminary case study from Osaka University. It's 4 years old, but it's very relevant today. Basically, the writers concluded that Japanese students, even at a higher ranked university, they're talking Osaka University, are not ready for digital learning. And the paper was written a few years ago, but it's still very relevant. Students know smartphones better, but are not proficient with using an English keyboard and in typing in English, or I'll make my own quote, in task-based online learning. Some teachers want their students to make PowerPoint slides. I'm finding at other universities right now, or make a video of themselves talking about something, or in making email accounts, like to use Google Classroom, or perhaps using another LMS in English. And or some students are not familiar with using podcasts or in using word processing software, even like Microsoft Word. And so there seems to be also a gap between higher and lower ranked universities, partly because some students do not have enough practice in using computers in English at the high school level. So teachers of first-year students can be quite busy in teaching students to learn English online. Overall, these writers from Osaka said that students are using computers for personal use, but not for educational purposes. I would say, in my opinion, that students are using their smartphones as consumers, whether to shop or peruse websites or to communicate with their friends, for example, but not so much in producing or in making something online, like slides or videos or something like that. In fact, the writers said that just because technology is available does not mean it will be used effectively, actually. So I think part of the problem is that some students just did not get enough practice at the high school level or before. So that's another gap in terms of like the educational background of students, where students at maybe higher ranked high schools might have more practice with using computers than students at lower ranked schools or maybe public schools possibly. Okay, this is something from a teacher who's working in Nagoya at Nagoya University of Commerce and Business in her paper called Online Learning During the Pandemic, Where Does Japan Stand? And she has some advice which she took from guidelines on distant learning during COVID-19 from the Commonwealth of Learning, which is an organization in Canada, which works for, especially for developing countries, but for developed countries, it's quite relevant as well. And they have like 6 things that they think are important for teachers to do to help their students out. So we start with first, empathy and care for your students. And we do not know what our students are going through in this current learning environment. And perhaps we need to give students the benefit of the doubt. When we're in the classroom, it's much easier for us to identify problems students have because we can talk to them face to face. But online, it's not as easy. Number 2, be proactive in both online and offline learning. They talk about that. So of course we think about the online aspect, but the offline aspect, when students are learning by themselves, we want to get them to learn to study independently without any problems with technology. And sometimes students may get frustrated with connection issues. So offline learning is easier in that way. So that's a big problem we have to motivate our students to learn by themselves. And it's a worldwide problem, I'm sure. Number 3, integrate online resources and adapt them to your context. So for example, I gave the example of Moodle, which can be bilingual in Japanese and English, so students can get help in their own native language if there are things they don't understand about the website. That's really good. That's one example I give. Number 4, assign homework considering the situation of the students. So we have to consider that university students have other assignments which they have to do from their other teachers, so maybe we shouldn't give too much homework. I have some of my students who are studying science and engineering, and we don't give extra homework since these math and science teachers can be really demanding. And I heard this was especially a problem about a year ago, that some teachers were very tough. Next, number 5, try to be available at certain times just to communicate with your students. And number 6, share what works with other teachers and try to work in teams. And also, what can teachers do for themselves? Using social media to contact other teachers to get advice on problems. And one example is called, I think, Online Teaching in Japan on Facebook, which has about over 2,000 members in Japan. And it's a very useful website where teachers can get help about any problems that they face in order to help their students. Yeah, so Online Teaching Japan has about 2,600 members, and teachers can pose questions, and we seem to get answers on the same day or just hours later. The teachers are very helpful, and it's very useful to get free advice from teachers who are very knowledgeable, and they can give help about many different things. And teachers are dealing with so many different things, and they're kind of isolated, as you know. So this is really useful. So online social networking sites to contact people, get advice. It's great. I really like it. Okay, that's all, everybody. Thanks a lot for listening to me.